Hi, this is Katie with Empowering Astrology, and this is your sneak peek at November's astrology. So this would be November 2019, and we are going deeper into Scorpio season this month, but we're also coming out the other side with Sagittarius. So this is meant to give you a, let's say, practical look at the astrology of the upcoming month, but also what's the deeper message? What's the deeper meaning? That's certainly the type of astrology that I do. I want to know, how can I best use this time? What is this astrology trying to, let's say, ask me to do or to become aware of? So there might be times throughout November where we, because it's Scorpio season and it's a time when we have to go deep within, that we're being challenged in some way on an emotional, psychic, or even spiritual level. So for those who are watching live, or even those who are watching the video replay, to send me your questions if you have them. That's what I'm here for, empoweringastrology@gmail.com. This should run anywhere from an hour and a half to 2 hours. It's a lot of stuff to cover. And I know that for those who are waiting for their sign, you might have to wait for a while. So make a drink, fix some dinner, wait for your sign to come up. But even with the other signs, maybe you're keeping in mind a spouse, a good friend, a parent, and you're kind of getting some insight as to what they are going through. So this is your November 2019 Astrology Planner, and today is October 28th, 2019. And as I said before, my name is Katie Sweetman. I am an astrologer here in Brooklyn, New York. I started Empowering Astrology, hard to believe, almost 10 years ago, to, let's say, give voice to the way that I saw astrology, which looks at, let's say, the difficulties that are inherent in each and one of our charts, and how do we work with them? How do we, let's say, find our highest potential? I'm also a psychic medium, so that's a dimension that I bring into my client consultations beyond the astrology. And so this is the rough agenda for today. We're going to have an overview. I will talk about what's called the Ingress and the Stations, like which planets are going into new signs and which planets are stationing retrograde or direct. We also have a full moon and a new moon this month, and then I will go sign by sign as to what is going on with each sign. So I am doing it slightly differently than I did in October, but hopefully should help us to have a good narrative for each sign. And, just some technical points before we dive in. Make sure you're reading, or in this case, listening, for your sun and your rising sign. And if you do not know what your rising sign, it is worthwhile, if you can, especially if you are in the US, to get a copy of your birth certificate and get a copy of your birth time. You may have to order what's called the long form birth certificate, because sometimes when you get a copy from the state that you were born, it doesn't have the full birth time. But when you do have that exact birth time, it gives you what's called the rising sign. It's, this constellation that was of the zodiac that was rising at the moment that you were born. So the idea is that your life runs on these two clocks, these interfacing, overlapping, sometimes going against each other clocks, unless you were born at sunrise, and then you just have the clock that's for your sun sign. So a little bit of a technical digression. I know many of you are all around the world. Some of you in Europe, some of you are in Australia. Generally, we're talking, I'm doing this from what's called an East Coast US perspective. In the case of the new and full moons, I do give it to you in, let's say, the major time zones for those who are speaking English. So you've got your England, your Australia, your New Zealand. So let's do an overview. And just to recap for those who joined me a little bit late, if this is your first webinar with me, the format is that if you have questions as we go along, there is a chat function. And just put your question into the chat. And then as we get to each section, I'll check back and see what questions you have. So this is your overview for November 2019. So just on like a very surface level, November is a month that divides us between Scorpio season and Sagittarius season. So this is actually something I was talking about in my Facebook Live today. Scorpio season, of all the 12 signs in the zodiac, there has to be a sign that takes us into, let's say, the darker material of life, a sign that talks about life and death, talks about rebirth, resurrection, transformation. So when we arrive in Scorpio season, we're crossing the veil, we're pulling it back, and we're seeing into a world that is normally invisible. Here, at least in the US and some parts of the world, we celebrate Halloween. Other parts, it's the Day of the Dead. We know instinctively that this is a time that when we honor this natural passage of life. And it's through our experiences with Scorpio that we get tested, we deepen into ourselves, we face our fears, and then we learn something. We learn something powerful. And then when we get to Sagittarius season, as we do at the end of November, we are stepping into the energy of wisdom, knowledge. What do you believe in? Sagittarius is a very philosophical sign. So that's how Sagittarius gets its wisdom. You have to go through Scorpio first. Scorpio, just in general, just some things to keep in mind. It's a fixed sign. It's typically a sign that doesn't like to change, which is ironic considering that it's all about the natural world in a state of flux. But it is a sign ruled by Mars that gives us the courage and the fortitude to go into life's situations where we need that bravery. There's a crisis, or we need to have the courage to face something or to talk about something with somebody. It's a sign of intimacy, vulnerability, but it's also a sign of trust. It's also a sign of sexuality. So Scorpio season is asking us, are we safe? Can we trust? Can we be open? So you might feel just a natural discomfort with this time, and that's what it's supposed to do. So as I was saying that, Mars is the ruler of Scorpio, and it's in Libra for most of November. It actually doesn't leave Libra until November 19th. So it's a time when we're having to do some soul searching, because Libra is what's called the 12th sign of Scorpio. We're having to ask ourselves deeper questions. We need to, kind of disentangle ourselves from the past, let go and prepare for this new life. I mean, that's what Scorpio does, is it prepares us for the next life. So going into Sagittarius season, it's what's called a mutable sign. Mutable signs, take us and prepare us for a coming new season. So, obviously Capricorn here in the Northern Hemisphere is winter. So the sense of things are moving, we're preparing. Sagittarius, it helps us to see the world. It helps us to open up to new options and new ideas. Something to keep in mind in November is that Jupiter, the ruler of Sagittarius, is in Sagittarius. It's been there since November of 2018. And this month, November of 2019, it's wrapping up its stay in its home sign. And so as Jupiter gets to the end of Sagittarius at the end of November, it will go into Capricorn on December 2nd. We might be having this review, in a way, of what Jupiter and Sagittarius has been teaching us. And it has been 12 months of trying to look at these deeper themes of faith and philosophy, and let's say the faith in ourselves, faith in the world, faith that things will work out. So as I was saying, Jupiter at the end of Sagittarius, towards at the end of November, it's like, what did we learn this past year? I think Jupiter and Sagittarius, Jupiter is the teacher, it's the guru. It's a planet and a sign that has a lot of wisdom. It's learned a lot. And so we might be called towards the end of November to really demonstrate our wisdom. So these are your ingresses and stations for November 2019. We start November 1st, Venus arrives in Sagittarius. It's been in Scorpio since October. I can't think of the exact date, but Venus is traditionally not at home in Scorpio. Venus, normally a planet that is very accommodating and very sweet, has to, let's say, don the clothes of Mars in Scorpio. And so it's been a appointed place for Venus to be, but it's been a time when we've been a little bit more tuned into this idea of relationship and even sexuality as a currency. Venus and Scorpio really highlights transactional relationships, for better or for worse. But I think Venus and Scorpio also has a very strong power to it. It loves body, mind, and soul, sometimes bordering on obsessive. But I think this has added this other element throughout October and also going into November, where we're doing a lot of relationship work. Don't forget, Mars is still in Libra for most of November. And then on the 26th of November, Venus will go into Capricorn. Venus in Capricorn, Venus in Sagittarius, it tends to be more playful. We love travel, we love exploration, we love kind of the exoticness life, exotic beauty. It's a very bohemian place for Venus because Venus likes a lot of freedom when it's in Sagittarius. So it gets to Capricorn on the 26th, and Venus typically is a bit more traditionally minded when it's in Capricorn. So Venus will, I think we have to kind of really get clear about what we value when Venus goes into Capricorn. Mars, as I was mentioning, arrives in Scorpio on November 19th. So up until this point, Mars is kind of hanging out behind the scenes. Libra is what's called Scorpio's 12th house. But when it gets into Scorpio, we get that last push, that last punch of Scorpio season. It's like Scorpio finally gets its energy back. And if you are a Scorpio and you're watching, it's typically with Mars and Libra at the time when you are not really pushing out there. And so I know if it's your birthday, maybe you're kind of feeling like there's not a lot of traction, or maybe you need to like rest more. But if your birthday is the 19th or later, it's going to be a very powerful coming year for you. Mercury is also retrograde for most of November. It actually turns retrograde on the 31st of October, and then it's retrograde until the 20th, and it will turn direct at 11 Scorpio. So we are, in this Scorpio season in November, doing a lot of, let's say, investigation, digging, looking behind the scenes. Mercury in Scorpio is a placement that tends to be very intelligent, very sharp, and you can't kind of, let's say, lie to Mercury and Scorpio. Lies just go, sees right through lies. So I think that there's a sense of like truth and information that is very clear when Mercury is in Scorpio. And I think with the retrograde, we do need to double check things, but it could mean that things are coming out. The things that were hidden, the things that were, let's say, people were lying about, come out. And then on the 22nd, the sun enters Sagittarius. We start Sagittarius season. A few days later, Neptune turns direct at 15 degrees of Pisces. So Neptune has been retrograde for 5 months. It's been retrograde, of course, in Pisces, a sign that it's been in since 2012 and won't leave until I believe it's 2026, maybe 2025. But this is a time where on a human collective level, we're all having to really do a lot of deep spiritual work and to open up to something bigger. But it's also been, I think, a bit crazy in the last 8 years, but I digress. So let me just take, let me just look into the chat before we keep going.